Welcome to Mystical Messages. I am Hilary Harley, your podcast host. I am a soul guide and astrologer. Mystical Messages is your podcast gateway to discover and learn about the realm beyond the veil, including all things intuitive, metaphysical, and the healing arts. To learn more about my work or to book a session with me, please visit hilaryharley.com. If you would like to read my monthly forecast, you may find the full written transcript for all astrology episodes on my website. That way, if you hear something and want to re-listen to a forecast or to check a date of a cosmic event, you may find it on the written monthly forecast on hilaryharley.com. Today, I am so delighted to have my very special guest, Rebecca Quave, join me on Mystical Messages to understand more about her work as a spiritual teacher, guide, and mentor. She can be reached at www.rebeccaquave, and that is spelled Rebecca, Quave.com. Welcome, Rebecca. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's fantastic to be here.
So we were introduced by a mutual friend and colleague. Can you, for our audience, tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, what led you to your healing practice, and what first drew you to it?
Yeah, so my background originally was in science. I was a very good girl who did what I was supposed to for the most part, even though internally there was a lot of rebellion. But I made the perfect grades, won the awards, and went to school and got a degree in biology. And looking back, I see that even my draw to the sciences was that I felt like I not just wanted, but needed, like required the answers to life, essentially, right? And then I continued on with the, trying to complete my end of the transaction that we're told will give us happiness, right? Since the achievements thus far in my life hadn't done it. I also got married. I also had a baby, and then had another. But even before having the second is when your other part of the question comes in, and how I ended up where I am now, right? Which is, lying in my bed, looking out at a postcard blue sky and wondering why all I wanted to do was just get back under the covers and not come out, right? Because I'd done the things. I had put my penny in and I wasn't getting a gumball out. And it was very confusing and upsetting. And, I went through a lot of trying to go the traditional routes of getting analytical help or medical help or whatever for whatever they thought was going on with me, which they couldn't even make up their mind what that was.
You're talking about Western allopathic physicians?
Of depression and, and all of that stuff. When you just show up and are like, I am a smart, capable person and I don't like being here. Why?
Right.
But I also knew, it's funny, I actually had a conversation with someone earlier today where they were talking about suicide. And I'm like, that was one of the most frustrating bits to me, was that I'd been aware from childhood that you're not really gone when you die. So I was actually a bit mad that that wasn't even an option for me, right? That I knew this isn't actually going to get me anywhere. I won't actually go away. And so then what do I do with that? What if I'm still not happy then? Right?
Wow.
So this led me to a lot of just internal questioning and culminating initially in a point of, what people refer to as like a pervasive awakening, like what Eckhart Tolle describes in the beginning of his first book, which I didn't find out until years after that happened to me. And I got a nudge to like go into a bookstore and sit down and open that and read it, which helped explain to me a lot of things about what I had at that point spent a few years integrating. And that's where other people start coming into the picture, is people kind of finding me from all over the world to help guide them through this process after I had integrated. And I want to make clear that there's not like a quote finish line, right? This is something that continues to expand, but there was a dramatic change at that point from
Mm-hmm.
everything that I ever thought I was and the world was and life was to a complete implosion of all of that, and then arriving in this basically a conscious experience of oneness and truth.
That is an incredibly comprehensive and beautiful description of many healers' journeys. But what most resonates with me is you're trying to check the boxes that we're all told to check. And especially for women, be the good girl. For guys, it's like be that upstanding man and, citizen. And, for women, it's like doing the thing and getting married and buying the home and, raising the family and having the
And
career.
even that was like my second course of action, what I call the Martha Stewart route. It additionally was it initially rather was the academic achievement,
Mm-hmm.
and then I tried to go the Martha Stewart route, and all it did was just wildly stress me out. And I as you say that, I have this distinct memory of my oldest first birthday. And I was so mean on the day. I was unbearable on the day because I had stayed awake. I had gotten myself crazy, hand making the cake, hand decorating the cake, making all this food from scratch, like as if
Mm-hmm.
the 1-year-old cares remotely, right? He just
Right.
wants to be loved by his mother. That's all it is. And then, like I said, that stressing me out so bad that then, oh my God, you would have wanted to be within 10 feet of me on the day because I was just
Right. A ball of knots.
snarly, very, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that is one of the purposes of mystical messages is to highlight voices such as yours and practitioners. And one of the common threads is the healer's journey, where many of us, in fact, I would say far and away, the balance of us go through checking all the boxes, doing the thing, and then we encounter a health crisis of one variety or another. And, I believe very much in doing both allopathic and Eastern medicine. That's just my preference. But
Mm-hmm.
before I got to that crisis health point in my journey, it was, oh, I have to do allopathic Western medicine because the rest, as I was raised, the rest is like, voodoo.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I really, really resisted it. And finally, I went through surgery and yeah, I had chronic sinus issues. And so I went through all the surgery and I ended up, nothing was working. So I went to an acupuncturist and that blew the doors open for me. And so it seems that this is more common than not a very similar thread where the healer on the journey is really forced to turn inward. And so how did you come out or begin to emerge? I mean, I know that is a multi-layered unfolding, but what was that like for you?
Yeah. So I'm also, I spoke to a lady recently who, like you said, it was an acupuncturist. It was,
Mm-hmm.
experiencing acupuncture that started to open doors for her, which it's interesting. And what you said about this is it's a journey that so many people go through, right? And that's even my initial impulse when you asked me the question was this sense of like, oh, tale as old as time. We all know this story,
Mm-hmm.
right? But at the same time, for people who are maybe more at the beginning of that journey, it is very important to hear these stories, right? And understand that there's going to be something on the other side of it. And so for me, what that was on the other side, from inside of my experience was bliss, was waves and waves and waves of indescribable bliss and
Wow.
incredibly deep peace. Bliss to the extent that sometimes I would have to just run up and down the stairs in my house because it felt like I had to burn it out of my body, if that makes sense.
Wow.
A whole series of, I mean, I didn't have an urge to eat or sleep for quite some time. I mean, the kinds of things that people will tell you are impossible became just what was happening in my life. Simultaneous with that, from the outside, you could have easily looked at my life and said, "Oh, I don't want that. That is too much upheaval and turmoil."
Mm-hmm.
And even you could have grabbed me from a year prior or a few years prior and offered me this. And that version of me, I can tell you right now, would have laid on the floor, kicked and screamed, offered to cut off a limb in order to prevent those circumstances.
It's so
Okay.
true.
Because I didn't have an understanding of what what I actually had access to
Mm-hmm.
as a foundation for navigating those changes. So, for example, what I mean by that is I went through a divorce, which of
Mm-hmm.
course people, oh, what? Oh, that doesn't sound fun. No, it was perfectly fine. I mean, now this was, like I told you, it took years to really integrate that first big burst. And so there were times that I look back on now that I go, oh, I would have handled this a little differently because in this state where like I literally couldn't comprehend any
Mm-hmm.
uh, trouble, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sat my husband at the time down and said, listen, I finally understand what love is. And I, for the first time, love you deeply in a way that I can't even describe. And we're getting a divorce. And of course, naturally, totally understandably, he was like, what are you doing? You're talking crazy. Those two things don't belong in the same sentence. And I'm like, what do you mean? Of course they do. Because we're doing this, not
Right.
this.
Right.
So to keep us here would not be a loving thing. And he's like, you're
Right.
just talking stuff I don't know.
Right. You're swimming in two different directions rather than together.
Exactly. And it's like, so to force us to do that together is a very mean, right?
Right.
So, but that, so it ended up looking like a lot of things that you might think that you don't want. And certainly me before that would have thought that I didn't want. Walking away from what I thought was my dream house before we ever even moved into it, that I had like manifested so hard and whatever and all of that and brought it into being and then never even lived in it. Picked up me and my two kids with no idea mentally how any of this was going to work, but I just had this inner move and knowing that we moved from New Orleans to Miami and on our own. And I had been at home with the kids. That was the other thing that I got told was like, oh, well, single mom life is, going to 3 jobs and still not making it and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, that doesn't sound like what I'm interested in doing at all. No. And so that's not what happened at all. And it was a really beautiful unfolding over the years.
So, how did you come to your modality or modalities, I should say, plural, begin practicing and seeing clients?
Yeah, so that's everything that I teach or work with is all things that are my understanding through direct experience. So I don't teach any other teaching. And then my work with people's it's basically on all layers and levels of being, right? So it addresses them physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, and energetically. But it's really being directed by them. It's being directed by their soul, essentially. So it's a combination of, energy activation, frequency transmission, which can be silent or which can involve sound, like you see the bowls behind. Well, no, you can't. The people listening can't see. But
Rebecca has beautiful crystal
alchemy
bowls.
bowls.
Yeah.
Yeah. But also a lot of frequency transmission happens with my voice as well. So all of this was just things I just knew that I could do and just started happening from that
Hmm.
point on. And it's just been sort of an experimentation and refining and honing process as the variety of people that I've worked with over the past almost 20 years now um, come to me, and I'm able to just, so there's not so much like a fixed process in place so much as when a person or a group of people present themselves, I become aware of what's needed and
Hmm.
allow that to unfold, if that makes sense. Because
Right.
fundamentally, all of these things are so much simpler than I think we expect them to be,
Yes.
because fundamentally, we are self harmonizing and our energy systems are the same, are self-harmonizing. So all of the things that people think that they need another tool and another trick and another technique and another modality to do to their emotions, to their energy, to their whatever, um, what we primarily need to do is less interfering, less interfering, because all of this, if we let it move the way it needs to move, its final resting place is always peace, is always harmony. So whatever we need to do to to then not do, if that makes sense, to peel
Hmm.
back those layers of our inclination to interfere.
I so admire and I really hear and appreciate that, what you're describing, because it's the egoic mind that thinks we need to follow a prescribed or a prescription, a prescribed modality or use a particular tool. And you are essentially a facilitator of people's journey, and you're allowing them to blossom and unfold rather than interfering. It's like taking your car in. I mean, this is talk about simple. The analogy that comes to my mind is taking your car in for an oil change, where you're very refined spiritual technician and you know how to guide somebody or a group of people to, I've never heard the phrase self harmonize, but that is so beautiful to self harmonize, because I was trained in Reiki and people think, oh, you're doing something when you do Reiki, but it's actually bringing the person back into balance. It's a facilitation of allowing an individual to come back into their own energy, self optimal energy. So that's a really beautiful way. Self harmonizing is beautiful.
That is what is so, and I love watching people come into that, right? And it's just that, so essentially, my presence, whether that is in person or audio or whatever, or even just if I've written something or whatever, acts as part of what's happening, is that acts as like this gateway, sort of
Hmm.
like a door being held open for people to step back into what fundamentally they were already in, but just not aware of that they were in, right? So
Right.
step back into noticing and being consciously aware of the truth of themselves.
Yeah, to that is so accurate in my experience of what you're describing, is to live in their own path, their honest, free path that is 100% true to their soul and their soul's journey. Um, so what do you consider to be your specialty? I mean, do you have a particular
I do,
um
well, I kind of have a couple, right? So I, broadly, I would say that it is helping people experience soul fulfillment when the world has not given it to them, right?
Mhm.
So I tend to end up working with a lot of people who have not had trouble necessarily with physical success, right? Like they get that that's not so hard for them. And what feels really bumpy is, why does this feel empty when it was supposed to feel great, right? Then within that, those people tend to often, now what I'm speaking to first is primarily my one-to-one clients. So they also often have something really big that they're ready to birth. And
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of what I do is a midwifery of that process. But the truth is, such a big part of opening to that birth process being something smooth and enjoyable and not begging for an epidural is that what brings that soul fulfillment in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's that, but they walk in with the expectation that the soul fulfillment is going to be on the other side of that next big thing, right?
Right.
But in
Right.
reality, it's the soul fulfillment that facilitates and allows that next thing to come into being in a way that's beyond what they even knew how to expect. Because these are people who know how to get from A to B. And what I help them do is go someplace they didn't even know to ask for. Um, then there's also, you mentioned the good girl thing earlier. So in my group programs, there's a lot of that energy of, um, well, essentially like a Virgo energy, right? And so those one-on-ones, I could also say are sort of Taurus vibes, right? So um, some of those are then kind of might be more experienced seekers, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak. Whereas my private clients sometimes this is a new thing to them to be going inward in the first place, or they've tried some things peripherally, but there's such a tendency toward discomfort with change and discomfort with like that, the depths of that inward journey, that I help bridge that for them and make it comfortable and make it easy and make it lighthearted and playful and fun. So there's a very cetacean, like dolphin energy that I bring to things too, that helps that be like so much easier for them to navigate. I'm like, oh yeah, we're gonna go to the depths, but it's not like scary depths. It's like sparkly dolphin depths. Okay, it's gonna be a good time.
Right. No, that
Yeah,
that is actually a very colorful description of what is possible. One thing you touched on was what I know to be chasing, these it's like the box checking that we were talking about earlier. It's like
yeah.
my satisfaction, the quest for perfection, the disease to please, all of that, and completely negating pleasing oneself because it's this quest of attainment, and happiness will always be on the other side of that next box that's
Hmm.
checked. And
And it
so,
just robs us, of the like overwhelming fullness and overflowingness of more than we could ever ask for, that's in the center of every breath. That's just always right here. And that was really the most stunning thing to me in that, in the initial moments of that first, whatever you want to call it, was that it felt difficult to speak at all, but I do remember that I very clearly said, nothing has changed and everything has changed, because it was so stunning to me that what I was experiencing, while it felt like indescribably different than anything I'd ever experienced before, it was just as clear that it had always been there. It
right.
had always been with me, that it always was me, right? So it was like, yeah.
No, and it's so true. It's like we're still in our same body. Our hair color, our eye color,
Yeah.
our body type is all the same. And yet there is this shift that you can't even really describe. And it just, as you said, everything's changed and nothing's changed. Um, so what is the greatest misconception about what you do? I mean, people come to you, I'm assuming one-on-one, born out of crisis or.
No, usually the one-on-ones, it's a, how do I describe it? It's that there's a willingness to follow the whispers, right? That there's this urge and this pull for like something more, right? Of
Mhm.
like, there's got to be more than this. Why does this, whatever? So there's a big transition point for sure, right? Like, and I can see that even if they think they're just showing up for like, how can we make this better? And I'm like, oh, it's about to get, are you ready to
So
go
much
really
better.
wild? Yeah, exactly. And so as far as misconceptions, it really depends on, mm,
What they're
so when
looking for.
people, yeah, exactly, because there's a tendency to, so for me in particular, I think that a misconception would be me versus like the type of spiritual teacher that's just going to, I don't know, sit next to a vase of flowers and speak almost in riddles, and you're supposed to just take that and do something with it, right? Um, I'm more interactive with people than that. I'm holistic in the sense that I do like I realize that I very much could just sit in front of a group of people and not even say anything, right? And there would be a powerful, powerful thing that happens. However, most people wouldn't necessarily integrate that for what it was because their mind has not caught up with it, right? Their mind
Mhm.
is like, I don't know what just happened, right? So for me, what's important and helpful is to also to be working on all of these layers. So instead of just saying, okay, well, that was a multidimensional transmission for you, so have fun with that, um,
Mhm.
that we bring the mind along and help it catch up through like giving the opportunity for them to whatever degree, like talk things through for themselves or hear some kind of input from me that helps those pieces click into place while simultaneously these other things are happening that are helping the body and the nervous system adjust to the shift, that are helping the emotional body open and clear and adjust to the shift, that are helping more soul embodiment take place, right? I guess I would summarize then the biggest misconception is the idea that it's just one thing rather
Mhm.
than because I think that in those some of the individual pieces are things that people are more familiar with, right?
Mhm.
That they've
Mhm.
heard of like XYZ modality or like a quote energy healer or some, you know what I mean, which are all good and helpful things. There's so
Right.
many things that are helpful. Um, but yeah, since I'm not in a box, I think that's probably usually the biggest challenge is people, the mind likes to classify. It's looking for like, oh, you did
Exactly.
this thing. And I'm like, not exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you say transmissions, are you channeling words or energy? I mean, how would you describe that?
All of the above, it just depends how
Hmm.
things, how it comes through. So sometimes there are words included. Sometimes it's things that can't be translated into words. So it has to just be direct as it is, which can then show up as what seems like silence, but is energy. There can be sound involved that involves me using an instrument. There can be sound involved that um, sounds like me just making what to the mind is weird noises.
Hmm.
It could be things that to the mind sounds like, oh, Rebecca's kind of singing. That sounds a little bit nice, but also weird.
Hmm.
So it just depends. And it can usually is a combination of those.
Um, so do you recall the first time you treated somebody and what your reaction to that treatment was? Or just, not necessarily the first person, but
Yeah.
among the
Though
first.
something's coming to mind. I wouldn't necessarily use the word treated because for me, it's always, I feel more like what I'm doing is inviting someone
Hmm.
um, into themselves, right? and they're the ones doing more than me. And for me, it's just that, like I said before, that gateway or that portal. And so what comes to mind is something that actually didn't even stand out to me at the time. It was more that later down the road, this person contacted me and described it to me because, of course, it really stood out in his mind because it was a turning point in his life. So, what happened was at the time I was volunteering with something that was a modality. And I was in a live setting, but I was out of, and I didn't even realize that this was happening until after I got the nudge that was like, time's up. It was like a little kitchen timer going off of like, you're done there now. And I was like, what? Because, I didn't have an objection to it. But what I didn't realize was that all along, what I was bringing to that, even though there was that structure and modality, I was still bringing me to it. And without even realizing it, when I was like out of earshot of whoever was the most in charge, right? So in this case, it was at a live event and we were in like a breakout room. And this man who had I forget how many like stents in his arteries and
Oh,
and a
wow.
pacemaker and like all this kind of stuff, right? Um, I again, this is what he told me back afterwards, years later, was that rather than asking him any of the structure of the modality I was supposed to be doing, I asked him to invite all of his anger from his entire life to form in front of him as this crystalline mass and to let the whole thing shatter. And the reason I was asking him that was because that's what I was just perceiving happening, right? So even when I'm working with clients or groups now, a lot of times people can mistake what I'm doing as like, oh, this is a guided meditation, meaning that
Hmm.
it's something that is written down or that I know what I'm going to say ahead of time. And it never is. It's always just that I'm describing what I'm perceiving is already happening for the person or for the group
Right.
of people and using that description so that their mind is at ease so that it sort of keeps up and has like something to follow along with for this process. So in that same vein, yeah, I asked him and apparently like he went along with that. And he afterwards they turned, long story short, they turned his pacemaker off. He went to his cardiologist and his EKG was completely normal,
Oh,
right?
my
So that's why it
heavens.
was highly memorable to him, exactly what I had said and what had happened. But it was years later that, like
Wow.
I said, he called me up and was like, do you even realize what you're doing? And I was like, what do you mean? And he described this thing to me. I was like, I said that because at the time it was still sort of settling into me what I was doing, that like
Hmm.
it's always unique to the person what
Right.
because it's not like that was then something I repeated to other
Right.
people of like,
Right.
oh, I've got this new modality. It's called let your anger be crystalline and let it
Right.
shatter because
Right.
it's
Right.
got nothing to do with what's going on with somebody else.
That is remarkable indeed. For sure. And one for the memory books. My guest, very special guest, is Rebecca Quave. You may find her at Rebecca Quave, and it's QUAVE.com. Spiritual guide, mentor, teacher, and facilitator. Um, that's pretty mind blowing. That
Well, and to
story.
be clear, this was not me doing something to him, right?
Absolutely.
This was him stepping into something that he was ready for. And I was just aware of it. I was able to guide him through it. I was able to be that presence that made that easier for
Hmm.
him to be
Hmm.
aware of and do. But as I tell clients all the time, listen, you don't even want me to have a magic wand that
Right.
can tap you and make everything better because
Right.
then guess what? Then I could undo it. I could take it away. What I'm here to do is guide you into what nothing and no one can give you and nothing and no one can take away.
That is incredibly beautiful. And it's also, it calls to mind how um, careful you are with the practice that you've been given and the guidance that you've been given, because in the wrong hands, you can, I mean, I can certainly imagine how the ego could run away with what you're accomplishing.
That's why
And
mine had to implode first. So that I can't ever take it seriously again. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it can like exist. It's Rebecca, and it's like, I like these things and I don't like these things, and blah blah blah. And I'm like, okay, sweetheart, but
yeah,
it can't be in charge of things.
yeah. And my one of my favorite quotations is Einstein. He talks about how imagination is the gift and the mind is the instrument, and human beings have made the mind uh, all the all and everything. And it's until I think that's the pivot point that we have reached right now, is that we're realizing the imagination, the intuition, the spirit, the soul is really the gift. And we're to use the mind as like a car. Again, I'll use a car analogy, probably because I just had car work done.
Yeah. No,
um,
but that is exactly it. And after in that first wave of opening that I described to you, that was something that was wildly hilarious to me, was the first few times that I drove a car, because I was having to like because since this was not integrated and embodied yet, I literally felt like I was driving my body from back here, like with little, like this,
wow.
this was this puppet that I was driving around. So to drive the puppet, to grab the steering wheel of the car and drive that, I found hilarious and thought it was the funniest thing I had ever watched in my life, of like, let me drive this thing to drive this thing to go, 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 when like I could just be everywhere in existence. So like it was really weird and funny, but yeah, it's our body is very much the same way, like a car, like a vehicle. And yes, we've got to give it maintenance, and we should pay attention when the check engine light comes on, and you don't need to
Mm-hmm.
panic or smash the dashboard with a hammer to make the light turn off. That's not going to fix anything. You see the light, attend to it, handle it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's a perfect example. Um, so what do you consider one of your favorite aspects of your job, your work?
Oh my God. I mean, my favorite is just that I'm happy. My favorite is that there's so much freedom and joy in it. My real favorite, because what then lights everything up is the staggering beauty that I get to witness in watching people bloom. It
Mm-hmm.
is indescribable. And boy, I feel just choked up even describing it, because it's too beautiful. And what people forget about the beauty of their own journey is that the same way we love to watch, those time lapse videos of like a flower blooming, we love those, right? And why? Why do we actually love that time lapse video more than just a photo of a fully bloomed flower? Because the whole thing is so
Matt,
staggeringly
yeah.
beautiful, right? And then people forget that about themselves. They think that they just need to be behind themselves with an electric prod to just be that finished product, right? That
Mm-hmm.
photo of the fully bloomed flower, and forget to see the beauty of that time lapse video that they would watch in a heartbeat, that shows the whole unfolding and the whole journey. So yeah, I would, yeah, and now that I say it, I would say that's actually my favorite part is witnessing the beauty of people's unfolding.
That's incredible. And the analogy to the time lapse unfolding of a flower, what comes to mind is like where the little leaves and sprouts first poke through the soil and then it grows, the stalk grows, and the leaves come out, and then the bud and the flower, full flower. And, it's interesting in my work. I try to remind people, clients, that just because we have finished a certain milestone, whether it's elementary school or high school or college or our first job or, getting married, those boxes that we're checking, it doesn't mean that we're then somehow authorized to know everything.
We
And
never know everything. Our minds can't know everything. There's no one is fully cooked, nor will they ever be, because the nature of us is infinite. So there can't be a finish line on that. It's contradictory.
exactly. And so I always use the analogy or the scenario of the toddler that is trying to master a certain skill, and they see that toy across the room, and how are they going to get there? And it's by learning to walk or learning to crawl. And if we can remember that that's the same drive to achieve, or the quest, I should use the word quest rather than achieve, because that's what lends and leads to self mastery. And so, and the fulfillment, it's like, oh, wow, I
Yeah,
did this. And it's not so much box checking, it's the journey and what we learned on that journey. My kid,
exactly.
my kid,
Exactly. That's self
go
uh
ahead.
no, yeah, no, I fully agree that self-realization is um, what it's about. And there are moments in that where the toddler um, just plunks down on their butt and yells until someone brings them a toy. You know what I mean? And they soothe with that a little bit, and then they get back up and try the crawl again or try the walk again.
Right, right. And it is a normal part of learning, any learning, situational, relationship, experiential, to get frustrated. I mean, we see it in art and science most vividly, but certainly in business and sports, it's like problem solving, or, the day to day existence of how we're going to get through the day. It's like, we're constantly problem solving, and so many of us don't think of ourselves as creative. And what I am really admiring and hearing about your work is you're acknowledging and you're opening and certainly facilitating, and the word invitation, which I love, is to acknowledge that creator that each of us has. What is the toughest part of your work?
Probably helping people understand what it is in the first place before they actually do it.
So when
You know
people
what I
are
mean?
referred
Which I
to
guess
you,
isn't the part of the actual work itself, right? But in order to be able to do my work, someone has to, sniff a little bit and decide to get close enough to take that dive in, right? So I tend to find that the most challenging part is helping them understand what it is and what's possible, I think.
uh, the outcome or the result or the goal.
Or just connecting with it in the first place, right? I
Okay.
think that it's so outside of most people's daily lives and experience, right? And then at the same time, what I love about it, and to me, what's most powerful about it is that it's really not. And it's
Hmm.
not meant to be, right? I'm very anti-cave. I mean, that I say that jokingly. I'm not anti-cave, but I'm very much about the integration and embodiment of this journey in your life and in your daily life, in the most what you might think are mundane, very physical things. That my work is not a means for floating out into the ethers and not coming back, or using it as a bypass or an escape or anything like that, right? So it's highly practical, and it is all about integration. But I think sometimes, like, I just do my best to make a point of saying it both ways, because so much of what I refer to or talk about and what people experience with me does seem so beyond the bounds to people,
Hmm.
because it is. But like I said, then it's also anchored in just normal
Right.
life.
Reality. Yeah.
Yeah.
It can seem too abstract, but then it's really not. It's the same mechanics, and it's just allowing the imagination to take a leap.
Yeah.
Uh,
And it's having that undercurrent of what you tap into, that is the nature of all of us, that you can describe as peace or love or any of those things. And I use as an example, I mean, just the other day, so last week I took a decent fall
oh,
and busted up my knee and my shin, and I sprained my hand. And I realized that that was an opportunity for this, like, reminder, because I think sometimes um it's easy for people to assume, like, oh, again, because the mind sees things in this binary way, right?
right.
That, like, oh, well, Rebecca's just in the peace and the da da, and, like, I don't think maybe that's not even real, or maybe that's not actually accessible for me. Maybe that's not something I can actually do. And so I spelled out to people, like, okay, listen, yes, the peace was there, and yes, I was not ever, like, unhappy through this moment. But guess what? As I fell and whatever, and I then also, because I was 2 hours away from home, I wasn't sure what I'm going to do
Oh,
next, how
wow.
this is going to work out. And I cried onto my steering wheel. And so, like, energy that needs to move is always going to move. And it's
Hmm.
actually the things that people are trying so hard right now to not feel, that are actually the gateway to what they want to feel,
Oh, that is
right?
beautifully
The
said.
things, the feelings that you're rejecting are the pathway, are the gateway, are the invitation to what you think you would like to feel instead.
That is very wise. That is very wise. It's shadow work. Um, the gateway to the deep dark is resisted tooth and nail by so many, and yet that's where the treasure is. It's
It is, but you get to bring a light with you,
mhm.
you know,
Yeah. Oh, for
into it
sure.
when you do it, you know? So I think that a lot of times, um, and again, just in the way that our minds are built for this duality amongst the spiritual, whatever assortment of things, I tend to see one or the other. I tend to see either this, like, very floaty, la 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 la, oh, everything is light and wah 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 wah, and it's not anchored and it's not grounded and it's very bypassy and it's escapism, and, like, people can go very unhinged.
Yep.
Um, and then I see a, like, oh no, we've got to go into the depths and the shadows and the da da da, and then it's like, okay, people tend to get stuck there too, of, like, well, I'm just almost romanticizing their trauma, if that makes sense, of, like, we're
Hmm.
gonna now live in the swamp, and, like, like, I'm not bypassing. Okay, well, but are you kind of escaping into that, because there's more available than that, right? So it's really, for me, about how those two come together, how the the truth of both of those is actually one and the same. So for both of those, there's some truth to it, right? Like there's the truth of we're all one
Absolutely.
and everything's beautiful and all of that, but there's a distortion to it too. And again, there's a truth to, well, we can't ignore the shadows, and there's a distortion to let's keep diving for shadows forever.
Right.
You know?
And
Yeah.
and looking for dirt and trauma wherever
Yeah.
it could possibly exist. I mean, that's very refreshing. What you're describing is it's both and it's not either
Yeah.
or. And
Because what I find is that when we do truly anchor into and integrate and embody the what people think of as the light side, that brings to the surface the stuff that's not that anyway, in like such a smooth way. I kind of see it like if you have a fountain, like a water fountain that's turned on at full strength, you can like there could be mud at the bottom of the fountain, and you can even throw new hunks of mud into the fountain. But as
mhm,
long as it keeps running, it's going to wash them out, you
right,
know?
right, right,
But if
right.
we turn off the fountain in order to just go try to get with a chisel to get all the mud out, I mean, you can do it, but it's just a way more difficult process that doesn't have to be that difficult.
That's a terrific example because it's such a visual. My guest is the amazing Rebecca Quave. You can find her at RebeccaQuave.com. It's Rebecca, QUAVE.com. Spiritual guide, teacher, facilitator, and mentor. Um, I would also say energy alchemist, if that isn't too lofty or scary of a word for some people. Um, so we're coming to the end of our session, our discussion. I could talk to you forever, literally. Um, the last question I just want to ask is if you could change the world for better in some way, how would you do that?
Hmm. So my first impulse is that it is to look at the question itself the same way, because people show up to me, looking to change themselves for the better. And their journey is from the outside looks like they changed for the better.
Mm-hmm.
But from the inside, I see just an unveiling of what they were all along. So I would really wish the same for the world is on one hand to say, do not interfere with it because its blooming process is also happening. And at the same time, I would say to support that blooming in all the ways that I can, because again, there are all these layers to things, right? There are it's not, and I think that's one of the big misconceptions in spirituality too, is the either orism of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
approaching something from an inner individual level or approaching it from an active external like activism level,
Yep.
right? And I say it's both. We have to each do our own inner work that brings us back to peace. And there are structural systems in place that what some people's path is to be the ones actively bringing attention to those and helping dismantle them, right? Ideally, what we could do is have even those people doing that from rather than a place of frustration or agitation, doing it from a place where they're anchored in that knowing of peace for themselves. And then as an expression of that peace, dismantling these external systems, right? And that's key to really my work with people in general is that distinction between pursuit of or expression of. And most people, even on an individual level, tend to spend their lives and doing even whatever action they're doing or even inner work that they're doing in pursuit of something. And the shift that I help them with, one of them is doing, it might even look externally to people like the same thing, but it's completely different experience. to
Mm-hmm.
be in expression of something than to be in pursuit of it.
That is so clear. Um, because going back, I just want to touch on this. It goes back to what we were talking about chasing. And the more you chase, the farther away the goal can get. And it's the pivot and the redirect that we have to do inside. And we don't often know how to do that. And your gift is helping people understand how to uh, rotate
Yeah,
and
and to
step.
get past the mind's assumptions that say that, oh, well, if I knew deeply and felt in my bones that I am already what I was pursuing, well, then I would just sit down like a blob and not do anything about it again. Right? And that's just not the case. The truth is that your most powerful expressions and your most powerful actions arise from that place of I am already this
Right.
versus
Right.
I hope to become this or make this happen or attract this to me or whatever, which is a whole nother thing I can go on, honestly, is how everything that people have been taught about manifestation of like attract this is just the flip side of the same coin of go get this and make it happen. They're both, the reality is that it's just, it's about that it is you and you express it. Kind of like I have one last visual for you then maybe that you'll like is if you've seen, have you seen the movie Moana?
What movie?
Moana?
Yes.
Okay, so remember at the end when the water clears the path for Moana and what we've been told all through the movie is the villain, the lava monster, the da right? The nemesis. She walks across and she sees this for what she really is and
Mm-hmm.
just touches her and puts her forehead to her and that's it. And the lava starts falling away and it was the beautiful goddess that they thought was missing and had to defeat the lava monster in order to find, right? And I even one time at a retreat when that movie first came out, we watched the movie one night and because that's what I feel like I do with people
Right.
is make that connection with them that lets them unveil themselves to themselves.
That's so beautiful. It's so clear and it's so beautiful. Um, somebody at Disney is really plugged in and Pixar too, because some of their movies I recommend to so many people.
I love that. Yeah, there's such a great storytelling and using music as well that
Mm-hmm.
Disney does so well that I'm very much a fan of, even though um, the corporation, the Walt Disney Company, I have some,
Yeah. Yeah.
anything that seeks to monopolize
Mm-hmm.
in the ways that any of our big corporations do right now is obviously not the way forward. But that's another story
Yeah.
for another day.
Yeah, that is a whole conversation for sure. But yeah, in terms of the movies that and films that they come out with, they hit both adults and children certainly, and everybody in
Yeah.
between.
There's a very, very immensely gifted group of creatives that they have assembled
Hmm.
and it shows that it has what has created their legacy of incredibly emotionally compelling and memorable storytelling.
No, 1,000%, 1,000%. My guest is the remarkable Rebecca Quave, spiritual guide, teacher, mentor, facilitator. You can find her at Rebecca Quave, QUAVE.com. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Mystical Messages. As a reminder, to learn more about my work or to book a session with me, please visit hilaryharley.com if you would like to read my monthly forecast to check dates of planetary events and cycles. You may find a full written transcript for all astrology episodes on my website. Thank you so much for listening today. Please join me again in 2 weeks when I will bring you my astrology forecast for the month ahead. I wish you many blessings as you journey forward.